Why is human in the loop still necessary? And this comes from the same issue we have with the vanishing gradient problem in AI, or that we have in running multiple experiments on the same data in data science, for which we do the Bonferroni corrector, that if you stack multiple experiments, multiple steps, multiple LLM calls in sequence, even if you have a very high accuracy for one call, like 99%, after like 5, 10, 15 of such calls, the likelihood that one of them goes wrong is very high. And as we use more and more of agents, where usually each task is decomposed into multiple steps or into multiple tool calls and answers, the likelihood of it going down a path which isn't wrong is very high. And this means that if we have critical workflows which end in a write, and a write is pretty general, like it can be a literal write to a database, but it could also be like a message to a customer via an email. And each of those writes should require an approval by a human, which is basically just a quick yes or no. Hey, I want to send this, and can I do this? Yes or no. And it should present all the information necessary for the human to actually make a decision. And it should also meet the users where they are. Like, for example, using Slack, email, or the other existing business tools. So they don't really have to break out of their flow and just quickly ask for a yes and no. And then it can go off on their day. And it's probably like in the majority of cases, like 80% of the time, it's likely just an approve. And then for the rest of the 20%, when it's a decline, the human can jump in, or he can trigger regeneration or a completely different try with a new prompt or whatever. And over time, you can optimize the approval rate. In my opinion, this will, for one, give really interesting trading data. And every company which can implement this pretty quickly can farm their users for a lot of training data. And especially if you are in an area where a significant amount of expertise or taste is required to make that judgment, you will get a lot of interesting training data your competitors likely won't have. Another interesting thing I think which we run into is, as we run into scenarios where we have like 99% accuracies, it will get really interesting because suddenly we are in a space where the default action is just approve. So people start to get lazy. And in something like, hey, we're going to send out emails, mass emails to a bunch of customers, it could be fine. But in something more critical, like I'm writing data to a production system, or a doctor is making a decision, like these high success rates can get worrisome because it integrates a default behavior. And if the decision is very costly, these very low error rates, but not like completely satisfactory, can get a little bit worrisome because people just get lazy. This is like, I think this is even called the uncanny valley or something like that. I think the second thing I would highlight is, again with Dexter, is like context engineering as a skill. Like the art of structuring, representing, and curating information for the AI to consume and for the AI to fulfill a task will become more and more important. And I think most people just like they create a prompt, it works, they are done with it, they never touch it again. um I think as an industry we aren't in a place yet where we really have good monitoring for what these models are doing, so we can't really monitor drift. And like most companies don't even have evaluation set up. So the context engineering part isn't really developed yet because we can't even quantify how good the context is performing, or whether our context starts to underperform at some point in the future. And for this, some ideas from me, for example, like I really like creating profiles if it's like static information. Knowledge graphs are also a good thing to check out. Don't overdo it. I think like there are so many different demonstrations of knowledge graphs, but to create a knowledge graphs, it takes a lot of skill and a lot of domain expertise. So it takes a while. Don't just default on generating knowledge graphs with LLMs with like a single prompt and that's it. You actually have to curate it, prune it, and maintain it over time. Another one is like timelines. I really love timelines. Another one for code, diffs. LLMs are really good at handling diffs as well. And I think also for text, for example, you could create a diffs view. And there are like hundreds, millions of different representations or ways to create representations, like structuring it in a certain way, like Markdown and XML are two really common ones, but there are way more. And this also brings us directly in like context window management. I think I really like to keep LLMs really focused on the task, so I prune everything else around it. And as our conversations get longer or our agents are taking over longer and longer running tasks, keeping that context to a manageable size so the LLM actually knows what it's doing, but also removing, for example, failed attempts from the context window will become more and more important. So I think this is something I would be on the lookout for over time. Yeah, I think these are my main takeaways. I will start to put them out as a newsletter as well. I will put the link to that in the comment. Otherwise, these were my takeaways. And if you like them, catch the full episode with Dexter on the podcast. Otherwise, I will see you next week. Have a good one and talk to you soon.